Well, thank you very much. I'm very much hoping we can get as much interaction as we did yesterday at the panel. When Horst asked me to moderate this, I thought, oh, this is going to be data science, AI, and healthcare. But it turned out it was quite a variety of different talks. And so I was very challenged today to try to figure out how to tie it together. We learned about a lot of different things, covering kind of the causality and counterfactual as sort of a way to get to action. We looked at lots of positive potential from being able to incorporate social information, but also some dangers associated with that, the kind of reward-risk kind of spectrum and how we have to manage that for getting trustworthy, reliable AI. So we hit a lot of topics. So I'll start off with a question that Horst asked yesterday. Is there something interesting and new that you learned today at the talks that you would like to briefly comment on? So maybe we'll start at that end and work this way.
Really, the importance to analyze the different aspects for a specific problem. For example, if we are discussing about health, the approach Miguel this morning from the causal and depending on the kind of problems, the importance of explainability if you are using deep learning, because it's fundamental also in the method of health, and it's fundamental to analyze the different technology and try to put together the technology depending on the context of the problem, particularly today in the area of health.
Okay, I will go for, apart from what Paco just said, about the relevance of the data and the good data for doing big models. And especially in this world where we need credibility for what we do and to attract people to use our technology, I think it's important to involve the generators of the data in the problem solution. It's important not just to use data, good data, but also to use the knowledge of the experts, which is, normally we forget about them. And sometimes that gap we have on the data can be solved just by listening the experts on the field, which can help us to create this simulation system that will help us to provide the unavailable data.
Great. So there were a number of great talks, and I learned a lot. Some of them are a little farther from what I do, but if I think from the perspective of causal inference from large healthcare databases, then that's something that really caught my attention was the discussion about networks and about community. And I think that this is something that has not been emphasized a lot in my field. And Sandy's comments and others gave me some encouragement that we're maybe now at the time where these methods are ready to be used. So lots of food for thought there.
Well, I'm going to be a problem maker. This is my role in life. So there's a number of things that I think I didn't hear. So for instance, I'm attracted to the fact that a lot of these large language models are now being solved with different technologies. So for instance, one of the ones that's coming up in my part of the world uses 10 to the 8th 1 over 10 to the 8th times the number of neurons. So, something that has 1 billion or 10 billion neurons, they're solving with 15. We have a couple of things I've seen which are essentially fairly direct solution methods and not backpropagation, which is just completely blows the economics of it into another territory. And the things that Shafi talked about are really interesting too, because many of these things are just not fit for purpose. Data has, possession, owners, uses, and that's not reflected in the technology hardly at all. That's one of the reasons that a lot of the appropriate and safety is such a concern, is because we're just not handling the data anything like we ought to. And she was pointing at some of those. So I think those are really interesting places to start thinking. Also, causality. I enjoyed your talk. I enjoy many things, but I think that in I'll say it, in an abductive world where lots of things are uncertain, I think that we may need to sort of pry that can of worms open again and sort of get in there and sort of reconceptualize a lot of it.
Well, I can think. Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I hedged. So, from my perspective, I was particularly interested on the kernel methods for cooperative bandits for game theory, I think. And I was, for many years, interested, I'm still interested in game theory. So the possibility of connecting game theory networks and, let's say, kernel methods, which for me, coming from math, is functional analysis, basically. That's fascinating. From the morning, I'd like to mention, if I may, I was very interested on the TDF topic. I must confess I knew very little about it, and the possibility of collaborating, because perhaps, as you can see from my talk, there is also this interest of different pharmaceutical ways of attacking epidemics, in particular COVID. So I look forward to collaborating with the group in Spain on the TDF and other subjects similar.
So a couple of things. So hearing Professor Herrera give an excellent presentation, it made me think a lot of the things that Professor Goldwasser said earlier, particularly the training. You guys remember the green box? So I've seen their slides a few times before. So I remember the green box. That could be used, for example, to help you, get an idea of where the data came from and therefore satisfy some of the regulatory requirements, particularly the European Union. So that's one thing. The second thing that I didn't hear any discussions about, and I think we should, seeing that this is Abu Dhabi, is data markets, particularly health data markets. So is there a possibility in the future where we are able to get some access, limited access to health data belonging to other countries? And so we've done, Sandy's done previous work with one of our master's students who's now back doing a PhD on using sharding techniques together with multi-party computation to basically make available these sharded data on a public ledger where you have to pay to access it. And access means you're allowed to combine certain pieces and do computation on the encrypted data. So in a sense, it's an open data market. It's sitting there in front of your eyes, but you have to have the right keys in order to access it. And so it could be in the future that a health researcher here is trying to get access to a data market in Australia. And by the way, I've said the same thing that Australians do. I say you should look at this because there might be other people willing to pay you money from overseas who just want research data for nothing complex. Maybe what is it? Data about obesity in South Australia. Data about levels of illnesses. Nothing complicated like DNA data or cancer rates and all that stuff. So but anyway, that's the thing that I think maybe Abu Dhabi should be providing a platform in the long term for a data market.
Well, let me kind of pivot on that concept at least, because one of the I think concepts that was driven yesterday was that there's been a shift in the kind of way we look at the world because we have so much data now. So coming from this idea that you start with theory and you find or create data to support it, we now have so much data to mine and to look at, we can actually use that to guide us. But as we've talked about today, when we get to the real world, it has a lot of other implications that come with that, right? Whether it's kind of risk management or security or respecting people's ownership or starting to integrate with a society that's actually producing that data and their activities are part of it and so on and so forth. So, in light of kind of what you're talking about, what do you think are like the opportunities going forward, you know, for a progressive kind of open-minded group that might be here to investigate? You know, Sandy sort of alluded to maybe there's even more optimization and algorithms to look at. You know, but what other areas does the panel here see as being great opportunities if you kind of had a clean sheet to kind of address this, given this new world we're in? What are the big opportunities to make some impact in research? Yeah.
I don't know about the opportunities, but the major problem about using AI in the healthcare sector is dealing with doctors of medicine, because it's very difficult for us to access to their data. Everybody wants to have their own data on their computers, on their PCs, and they want to share it. So at least it's a problem we have, and we understand many people have. But there are now some tools like federated learning, which is giving us a lot of opportunity. And in Europe, there is a project led by several universities in which Salamanca University is involved, called Harmony, in which after 4 or 5 years or maybe more, we have been managed to share a lot of data, oncological-based data. And it's amazing because now we've been working with multiple myeloma problems in the past with very small amount of quantities of data sets. Now we can have access to thousands of data sets of patients in Europe. So I think an opportunity for us is to work with these type of tools and provide the data owners of the right security levels and the data protection level. So we have tools to anonymize the data and to share it. So the property of the data remains to the owner, but we all can share it in a safe and reliable way. So I think if we go into that direction, we will be able to create much better system, because most of the cases, this is what I need, to access to the data and to information.
But Sandy, you know, when you were doing the work over in India and sort of developing world countries, presumably, you know, privacy was probably not as large of an issue there as it is here in Europe. So do you have a comment on what
Well, so one of the things that we're doing, some very interesting things, we're helping a member of the EU who's agile, more agile than the other members of the EU, to set up a federated health system in France and Germany. And so this is a way of pooling data without sharing data or violating the law, and sharing the benefits. And so this will be one of the larger ones in the world. And Thomas is being a little, so we're doing the same thing in Australia. He's leading that effort. But I mean, let me give you an example of something which I ran into a couple of years ago. A fellow came to me and said, you know, there's a lot of failed trials about Alzheimer's that drug companies have done, right? And what he had is he had a series of investors that had put together a fund of $14 billion to be able to pool this data and analyze it, because they thought that they should be able to determine functional characteristics and cures from that. But, and we have technology to allow that pooling without sharing the data, okay? But what we don't have is a way for, if you find that cure, well, who gets the profits? Because, well, my data had that special person, you know, I mean, so there's this sort of larger thing of how do you connect investment with the science in a way that everyone is willing to buy into so that you can make progress. Because, you know, in some alternate universe, you could have had cures for Alzheimer's being tested today if they had been able to pool that data and analyze it. It's not too complicated to actually do it. The thing that's holding them back is the investment problem.
Well, there have been activities where they try to go license large components of failed compound libraries from pharmaceuticals in return for an upside if anything is found. So it seems kind of like a low-risk kind of proposition. Are you proposing that such a program is attempted here? I mean, it doesn't have to be for pharmaceuticals.
Well, no, but there's many things in which investment is often sort of short-term or there's high uncertainty. Like, for instance, the problem with this one I just mentioned is that it's not just a one-to-one relationship. You've got, 8 drug companies.
You have to share.
All of, so how are they going to share? It depends on the data. What's in it? We don't know, right? And climate change, same type of thing. You could put money in there, but you have to be able to get money out. And there's so much uncertainty and so little way of sort of tracking what will happen that you can't get the investment that you need.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting conversation, but talking about health data, there are many different types of health data, of course, and we have mentioned a few. We are talking about the data that are generated by health systems doing their usual work. The main advantage that we can have with the methods that now have and with the databases that we have is helping health systems learn from their own data. So a health system is generating a lot of data every single day, thousands of millions of interactions, and health systems can become learning health systems in which they are using that data to because people are not doing the same thing within the health system, you have like multiple micro experiments that are happening every day and using that to learning what are the best strategies. So that I think that is going to be where we're going to be seeing more and more. There's a problem with that too that we have to keep in mind, or a challenge when we're talking about health data, which is trust. And open health data markets are dangerous. Because for this to work, we need the trust of the people that are part of those health systems. In the US, where there's more of a hybrid systems, there are some health systems that are for profit. Those health systems sell data. You can buy data from those health systems, and essentially, if you are a member of those health insurance programs, you have no choice. Your data is going to be sold. There are also public systems like the VA, like the Veterans Health Administration. That data is never sold. And in fact, to access that data, you need to go through a process that will require fingerprinting, a background check by Homeland Security, and 3 months of giving your private information until they let you access their data. Now, those systems have much more trust. In the future, it's much less likely that those people will complain about their data being used than others. In the UK, there is a similar system that has been created, and there's a lot of emphasis on convincing people that their data are not being sold, that the data that they are generating as part of a system is not a commercial product. And so there's a tension here. There is a big tension here. In fact, there are ethicists that talk about how if you are part of a healthcare system that is publicly funded, there is an ethical obligation that that data will be used for research. You don't have a choice. You don't control your own data. You have to have a government that makes sure that your data is not going to be sold, but your data has to be used for research.
Yes, and another question, because I remember your talk this morning, because you compared the health problem with the game theory, and of course the causality together reinforced learning and the possibility of to have a lot of experiment. We have several problems. Of course, to have data, to open the data in health in particular for collaboration. We can use federated learning for the privacy. Even we can use data from different countries, design similar model, extract the model and aggregate. We can solve partially or technically, we can solve the technical problem. And another possibility, let's suppose we can use generative artificial intelligence to generate artificial data in the same problem and to use them if we have any guarantee about the similarity and the quality of the artificial synthetic data, use them in the same way than game, as you discussed this morning, in order to check the quality of the model, even improve the model. This is another possibility in the future in the health. Of course, you need the complete guarantee that the synthetic data are useful data from you. But this is another possibility to explore, to have this balance between the original data and the synthetic data.
And this is actually the system that they are using in the UK now. For some of this public data, you can actually, you will be given some simulated data based on the real data, and this data will be used for you to test your models, to do your things. Then at the end of the process, you will get access to the actual data.
Can I just point out one thing, which is that when you say, you shouldn't be saying health data. You should be saying medical data, because the systems we have today are medical systems. They don't keep people healthy. There's very little emphasis on prevention. I remember the head of the largest insurance conglomerate in the US getting up in front of a bunch of people and said, look, you can put money in fixing things or you can put money in preventing them. In the United States, probably more than most, we put all of our money on fixing things and very little on preventing. And that's a very different type of data because it's data about lifestyles. It's about what you do every day. It's not what happens in the hospital or the clinic. It's like, well, what did you eat?
And
How far did you
fall?
fall?
Give Thomas a chance.
Sure. So in the spirit of coming up with crazy ideas, which is what we do at MIT, if you ask me what ADIA Lab should do, what Abu Dhabi should do, you should do the same thing as the fragile families have done. So they've collected 20 years worth of data. I would say you should need to begin to collect data from every citizen in the UAE, funded by Abu Dhabi. Why do I say this? Because the more data you have about people, the more attractive you are to investments, research, big pharma, and so on. And we're seeing this in South Australia. Why this is unique in South Australia, they have 40 years worth of biodata for every citizen, even deceased citizens. It's sitting there, and it's not even utilized. Their problem is they don't have the technology to make use of it, and that's why we're working with them. But this, I'm looking at these guys, write a huge check, going out 30 years, collect data for every,
No, but
all
also
of
saying,
the EMEA.
and pair it with compute
And
capability.
of course, that goes without saying.
Yeah. Because I think, oh yes.
Can I be a little bit controversial here?
Sure, you need to.
Can I be a little bit controversial here?
Controversial.
Yes, so I'm going to say that collecting data, having data is not enough. You need to extract information from the data. And without appropriate tools, you cannot do much. I mean, you can, for example, have tomographic data, classical tomography, whatever, MRI, and still you don't do anything with that without. So in that sense, I'll go for also developing tools such as nonlinear methods, as manifold methods, network methods. So there is need for
But it does go back to
theoretical.
some of the things that
Yes,
many speakers
indeed.
have been touching here, which is, you take South Korea, for example, for quite a long time, every medical clinic has to register the information with the central government. But they don't have a system by which third parties can come in and analyze it. There's a very short time in which privacy law was weak, but then they over-strengthened it almost in reaction to the notion that it would be stolen and mined for negative use. And so they overreacted, and now it's really very little is done with it. So going those hand in hand seems very important, and that brings up an interesting thing. We learned during COVID that the world is now very diverse, and so you can almost venue shop countries to find the places that actually have the policies or are willing to adopt the policies that will kind of get them in a good place. So thinking in that kind of light, what would you recommend? Or let's say you have maximum, you can say 2 things, and it's got to be short. Would you say that would be very, useful to do here, like, building a universal database with some kind of computational access, right? Well, let's start at the end and kind of go, what are 1 or 2 things, real quick? Or anyone,
Yes.
just anyone can volunteer.
Okay, I go first because I'm telling you something we have started to do. which has improved. In the last few months, we have seen a big improvement of some of the tools we are doing. We have a service for doing next generation sequencing using Illumina data, but now also nanopore technology. Also, we have been working with a company here in Abu Dhabi. Again, if someone is sick, we wanted to do a tool for doctors of medicine, not just for genetics. So someone goes to a hospital, say, I'm sick, may have something bad. So you perform a analysis, analyze with Illumina, so on, and you get a fast queue. We analyze, we sequence the genome and say, okay, you have anomalies on these genes, which are compatible with this type of tumors or cancer or whatever. Actually, if any of us go to perform, myself, I was really worried about it when I did it myself, because it happened that I have around 50 anomalies. I said, oh my God, I'm going to die. But it's normal. All of us have things that are not.
I'm sorry, it's a concept. Do you whole genome sequencing?
Very small. So
okay.
Now what we have done with generative AI is put our clinical history, which is very unstructured in Spain because we have many. We put it in there with our system, and based on your symptoms, together with the analysis of the generative AI, we have been able to really identify if someone has something or not with an accuracy we never had before.
So you'd recommend put the unstructured data of the health records
also together with structured data we can analyze, all together with generative AI we can do that.
Okay, great.
Yes, I agree with you, and all the cycle of the governance of the data really to provide trust to the people in the future is fundamental to guarantee the quality of the original data, and to put more and more attention also to the data, because it's very important to develop the models, but the knowledge is inside of the data.
But it's an interesting example because you have a huge challenge trying to address this for something like EU. But this is a country of only 10 million people and 1 million Emiratis with a different governance system. What would you think is most leverage for them to do here that's valuable for everyone else? Because it's hard to do maybe in a big country like EU. What would you pick as sort of a thing that would be useful here?
Yeah, but really, for me, of course, we have the two sides, and we have a lot of challenge. The data are fundamental, the quality of the data, and to develop in models of approach in order to guarantee that when we create the synthetic data, they have also enough quality to be used for learning or for testing. Is fundamental. Another fundamental aspect also is the green areas, as Manuel was presenting. For me, I think that in the future it's fundamental to optimize the algorithms and to guarantee really an equilibrium, because really now you must do continuous experiments. Okay. Really the cost, really the sustainability is also important. Then we have also an important challenge looking for approach, like Manuel presented another approach, in order to reduce the cost of the study.
Great. Sandy?
So I'm going to say we should do what we did 40 years ago.
Use your mic.
Oh, sorry. 40 years ago, there was no wireless, there was no onboard computing, there was all. And so what we did is we built a bunch of wearable computers that look like today's cell phones, right? And we just collected everything we possibly could, and had essentially we pretended that compute was free, and we said, well, what would you do, right? We're trying to sort of live the future. So we live in a world where there's going to be tons of data and tons of compute, and we don't know what the bugs are, and we don't know what the opportunities are. And probably the only way to find out is to take a sandbox with real people and go and try it, see what people come up with.
So even broader, more ambient data is...
Yeah. And obviously, you're going to invent the governance at the same time. That's actually maybe the biggest thing, is we don't have a clue about how to do the governance for real.
So there are lots of things that we can say about the data, the quality of the data, the types of data, medical data, health data, but nothing is really very important if there are no good channels to access to the data. And let me just give you one example. Okay, in January of 2021, the vaccines for COVID have been deployed in several countries. Which country had the first real-world evaluation of the vaccine in February of 21? Israel. We did that because the data existed and there were channels to use the data, so we would quickly work on that. So the first effectiveness, the first real-world effectiveness, safety, effectiveness in subgroups like in pregnant women, then Delta came, and the same thing. Other countries have the same quality of data. Other countries could have done it, but they didn't do it because they were not as ready. So creating those channels is important.
Your response to having a market for it was kind of interesting. Would that be a kind of regulated market for that data that allows many people to innovate on it, or is it something that you have to qualify for? Let's say the Israel project.
Because of legal regulations in most of the world, to access this data, you need to go through an IRB. In many cases, if you really need to access the data that can be identifiable, which is what we want, really, yes, there is a qualification that is needed. There is no way around that.
It's a fascinating thing. Years ago, we did a project with Ping An, right, which is the largest private insurer probably in the world, but over in China. And they did this thing where they asked their users if they could instrument everything on their phone. And in response, they could get discounts on their insurance. They actually had a very high adoption rate. Like when we were talking with them, 9 million people were on this thing. And so the data they had on it was phenomenal. And because they didn't have a privacy issue over there, because, well, they have it more now, but back then, it was kind of amazing what Ping An was able to do with that data. So it's a fascinating question, again, going to this arbitrage question of being able to go to different places and decide like what is the right thing that can actually advance the value proposition. Because one could argue that credit cards today never would have happened because people would be too worried about the privacy problem. But back in the day, they sort of just said, oh, it's valuable, I don't have to carry so much cash. So there's kind of a bit of a hen-egg issue here. I'm not trying to be Dr. Evil or something, but it's a question if we really believe in the value of this, which half the presentations are talking about this immense stored potential of unlocking this, and then half the presentations are saying, well, but there's a lot of risk. Well, then it seems like it's useful to figure out where do you apply the risk where it's acceptable to learn where you can reduce it. So I had this experience when I was at Microsoft. Trying to do telecom policy change in the US was impossible in the 90s. It got done in New Zealand, Finland, and Korea. And then it got brought back to the US when it looked de-risked. Okay, so I kind of keep wondering, opportunities that are here are largely ones where I think there's something that can be less risky here, but can benefit the rest of the world by basically kind of proving it out. So let's keep going and try to understand, like, are there ideas around this? Yeah.
I do have one which perhaps was not mentioned before here, which is getting people trained and interested in processing and understanding data. It's not enough to just have data. It's not enough to have machines. You also have to have people trained, as ADIA Labs is actually doing with different levels of people. So training the next generation to really do it. And I think here there is enough resources and interest to motivate students, to motivate the generations that we see here that have been to participate in this project.
Can I push my crazy idea again, even
Yeah,
further? So, if you want Abu Dhabi to be the largest repository of health data on the planet, you could begin looking at getting volunteers from the Hajj pilgrims who come to Mecca and say, hey, you're here, can I get some blood sample from you guys? And we'll remunerate you. We'll give you, I don't know, a free ticket back home. Or way better, we'll give you a freebie ticket to come to the second Hajj, okay? And give them devices, right? I mean, my point is, if you don't have data, you're not interesting.
What I understand, Korea, you mentioned Korea. We've been approached by Korea to help them. What they've done, as I understand it, is they've set up essentially cooperatives for different types of data, for consumer data, for health data, for things, which is the entire country, everybody's data.
Yes, all 50 million.
Yeah, and these are sort of quasi-private government things, and their intent is to be able to set up new facilities using very, very rich data. And they're calling it a data market sometimes, but the finger of the government is in there. It's not an open market.
Yeah, and the issue there is the government changes every 5 years.
Yeah, usually not terribly well either.
One of the points that was made, actually, it was in your presentation, Sandy, is this question that things like social media have really distorted some of the fundamental assumptions we tend to make about rational behavior and economics and so on. And I kind of took away from your presentation, and I think by induction, many of the presentations here, there's so much upside that can be generated from this. But then there's this kind of downside, and a lot of them are risks that are associated with these kind of behaviors that are hard to fully pull into our old theories, right?
That's right.
So what do you feel is the kind of solution to that, and is there an opportunity here to kind of look at an opportunity to model that or understand it better?
Well, we were talking with a lady there that's in charge of figuring out what Spain and the EU is going to do. I think that we need to insist on everything being audited, and that audit in a privacy-preserving way be publicly available so that you can ask questions about anything and detect when things are running off the rails. The fact that you have to get an IRB, that you have to do all these things, takes you years if you even know the data's there. You can imagine a fully privacy-preserving system. It would be expensive, but you could do it, that would allow you to just ask questions and at least get initial answers and be able to detect when things look promising or not, and then you'd have to get more permission to be able to go into the actual data.
I do think there's this kind of maybe basic challenge, though, that I often liken what's happening with social media to what happened in the 50s to 70s with sugar, salt, and fat companies, right? So it turned out that once you build industry to a certain level, it's very rational for capitalist industry to serve you things that you cannot help but like. And sugar, salt, fat is genetically programmed in you to like. Likewise, as we get to something like the internet, it's not surprising that commercial companies will arise that will prey to something else that's socially programmed into us, which is to be popular, have agency, and be surrounded by like-minded people, which used to be moderated by physical location, but now can basically be virtual. How would you combat that? Because that's a built-in human behavior. And is it really, how do governments now stand in the way of something that people may actually individually want to do or prefer to do, just like sugar, salt, and fat?
I think one of the problems is governments don't know when that's happening until years and years later, right? So transparency and illumination is the answer for those things, and a healthy dose of suspicion and so forth, so that people can begin asking and say, well, wait a second, these people are changing their behavior now. Is this actually what we want?
Anyone else have a comment before we go to questions?
Well, I don't know. I didn't understand much of what you just said at the end, but it just came to me in another area. I work with a company in Spain called Sigma 2. They do sociological studies, healthcare, also on a political level when there are elections and so on. And they have a problem with the data they get because they sometimes, many times, they fail on their evaluation because they think people lie to them. And we are working with them on tools for identify if people is lying or not. And in that sense, I happened to ask that recently I was giving a talk on AI, and someone from a Spanish association of urology problems contact me and say, okay, why don't you help us? We have a lot of data from all our patients, and we want to share all this data with you, and please try to help us to identify a diagnosis and so on. What can you do? Do whatever you can. Say, okay, send me the data. So initially, everybody wanted, but we send them requests for information, everything legal from the university and so on. And when we started to share general numbers, everything anonymous and so on, it happened that many of the patients who sent us the data were not sick from the data we got. So we try to see what happened, as that many of them were lying to us just in case we sell the information to an insurance company or something like that. And among them, they have a chat group, and they were talking about these people from the university. What happened if they sell our data? We shouldn't tell them the truth. They were worried. So I think it's within the human nature to be in the safe part of the problem in many cases. So it's important to be able to discriminate the right data in our studies to the noisy data or corrupted data, which can be done by chance or voluntarily. So that's important. But in any case, I think we have now enough tools, like to share data, to exchange data, to treat data, to make sure the data is anonymous, and it's a matter, I think, a political decision. If they go in the right direction and they are not afraid of that, we will be able to help the medical system a lot.
Okay. Since we're talking about data sharing and transparency and who should have access to the data, I think it's important to bring to the table a point, that is that there are interests out there in using health data. So there are some private interests. And one of the greatest concerns that many researchers in health have is that if the data were completely accessible to anyone, then why not a food company could go there and do their own analysis and publish them and say, no, sugar is not bad. And now the delay is in the medical literature, because until someone can do an analysis that shows that that was wrong, in case that was wrong, it takes years. So one way of filtering that is really, in fact, I'm sure we all some colleagues who work on controversial topics in health, and their greatest fear is that they're subpoenaed, that their data are subpoenaed by private company, because that means years of work that they have lost. So part of the system, some of the filters to make sure that only people who are qualified and have declare conflicts of interest have access to the data is in part to gain time.
But, I mean, so during COVID, things got published orders of magnitude faster. Now, there were problems.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is going to go for a long one, so I'm going to cut you off and we're going to go to questions, so, sorry. Question? Yes? Oh, it's way up, way up there. Maybe you can. Exercise. Yeah. Yeah, actually.
Hi, this is Sivaram Krishnan. There are two questions. First question is addressed to anybody, you can take it. The first question is about the use of synthetic data. We are all talking about data-related issues and all the stuff. I mean, very nice discussion we had. Do you see that domain of synthetic data and your usage becoming more prevalent in the future in the domain, in places where the actual data is not procurable? That's the first question. The second question is specific to Dr. Poku. You spoke about responsible AI and ethical AI. Me being, we are developing an AI product, synthetic AI, responsible AI product, and we come across this basic question: what are the cultural structures come into picture when it comes to ethical and responsible AI? Because what we consider in one culture is ethical is not the same in other culture. Let's say, for example, in the banking domain, what you consider as responsible or ethical AI in retail banking in one geography is not the same in other geography. So do you see any researchers?
Okay, let's hit the first question first. Okay. Anyone?
The last one, if I am not sure I understand, but in the last one, finally we need a contest and determine that any kind of responsible system must verify or must use some technology according to the contest, a specific contest. Even in the area of health, it will be different to work with the cancer, for example, than to work with the epidemic area. I think this is a great problem in the near future, because really the rules must be general, and in other, from one point of view, very general, but on the other point of view, to introduce some constraint according to the privacy of the people, the problem, and so on.
But someone like this who's looking at doing a company or some project now, do you think there's guidance for them now, or how long?
No, for a company now, now there are, in my opinion, this is a problem now, because in the case of Europe, that we are in the first step now, we will approve the IAT, the regulation, in January. 2 years later, is obliged to bring to, and then we have 2 years in order to have the rules associated to the sandbox. And it is not easy, because really it is to have a general rules in global scenario, it is possible, but the problem will be for a company for an specific context. We really don't know what will happen along these 2 years. It will be necessary probably in the first year to have in the different, we have 8 cluster, 8 general contests. Probably we need the rules in one contest.
This is follow-up to that, because we recently did a sandbox in Munich about a couple of months back. What we realized is the same question: what is relevant in Nordic kind of a scenario is not the same in continental Europe or in UK. Simple things like in healthcare or retail, what you consider as ethical in a Nordic scenario, I mean, 70% would say that its core is the same, but there are 30% variation even within EU Act when it comes to Nordic, when it comes to continental Europe, or when it comes to UK.
Yeah, that is true, but what's your question?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing is,
okay, that's the point. Okay,
that's the point.
You are right.
Yeah. No, done. Okay, question?
Well, thank you for giving me a chance to ask a question. Because we have very rare and fortunate chance to ask, a consensus about the data market, I want to ask whether today data is a public good. Because for a long time, data was private. Like whoever gets the data, they do whatever they want to, and then they are responsible for whatever the decision that they make. But these days, like people have very different thoughts, like data is theirs and then they can do anything. So like I want to ask whether we have a consensus on that, and then if not, what is the new role of the compliance or monitoring agencies to do, whether making the data available or channeling the data, analyzing data, auditing data. like what is the role of compliance body for this?
Let me just say two quick things. One is many journals now require that you put the data and in an anonymized form and algorithms online with the paper, which means anybody can run it and see if they got the same thing. And you can imagine formalizing that in a way that really works. But let me actually quote the Secretary General of China, Xi, who said that data is now a new principal means of production, along with labor and capital. Now, for the head of the loudest voice of Marxism to say that is incredible. But what it means is that we now have this new thing in society that we need to figure out what to do with. Now, with labor and capital, we have personal ownership, but we also have regulators, we have public goods, we have this very complicated set of relationships to balance the good. The same thing has to happen with data. It's not going to be a simple thing. It's going to be like with money or like with labor.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, I don't think there is a consensus about that in terms of data, but I think it is clear that health data is treated differently. There are a lot of laws about health data that don't exist about other types of data. And that probably is because people feel like that or governments feel like that. I have a research group in Sweden. We cannot get data from Denmark. I have a research group in parts of Spain. We cannot get data from other parts of Spain. And this is because of laws that say this is health data, it's private. In the US, it's also heavily regulated. So I think we cannot underestimate how much regulated this is. As Sandy was saying, many journals now have this requirement for data, and the standard answer is, I love to give you the data, but I can't. And they say, oh, okay.
So public good is, the word public good is a bit fuzzy for me. So let me scale it down to community good. Okay, so it's good for my town, and my town's got 5,000 people. Okay, let's just scale it there. And so if that's the scale, could we look at data cooperatives where people voluntarily say, I'm going to let you manage. So you create a co-op, there's bylaws, there's regulations, there's membership, there's governance, and members who say, okay, I will volunteer my health data of a particular type to you guys for us to co-manage together. And in the US, it's the equivalent would be, what is it, a credit union? Universities have credit unions, a co-op.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you all for participating. Thank you very much, Horst, and for ADIA Labs and everyone who helped organize it. And of course, thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you.
I think it was an excellent 2 days. And thank you.